Welcome to Stories from the Teacher's Desk. This is where educators connect, share, and grow.
In each episode, we share inspiring stories, practical strategies, and innovative solutions to empower teachers and transform classrooms around the world. You know how sometimes learning feels like you're staring at a mountain, especially something like writing well in another language? It can feel really solitary, like you're just stuck trying to figure out the best path up. Today, though, we've got a fascinating shortcut for you.
That feeling, being alone with the challenge. Educators think about that a lot. And that's exactly what brings us to the research you shared. A really insightful look at how students in Nazarbayev Intellectual Schools in Kazakhstan tackled English writing. We're going to unpack how they use a method called flipped writing to see some, pretty impressive improvements.
Exactly. And these aren't just any students. These are bright kids in schools for the gifted learning English as their third language after Kazakh and Russian. So the hurdles they face are pretty significant, which makes the way they're overcoming them even more interesting for us, to understand.
Yeah, definitely. And this flipped writing approach is key here. Think of it like this. Instead of just showing up to class and, being told to write, students first get to look at a finished product, a good piece of writing, and do some initial analysis on their own.
Okay.
Then the classroom time becomes focused on actively building those skills. It's kind of like studying the blueprint of a building before you even pick up a hammer.
Okay, so this blueprint idea makes sense. But what were the specific goals the researchers had in mind when they used this flipped writing method? Like, what were they hoping to see these students achieve?
Well, their goals were very specific and really targeted the core elements of good writing. They wanted to see if flipped writing could help students generate better ideas in the first place.
Right.
Then could it expand their vocabulary and make their word choices more effective? Could it improve their grammar accuracy? And finally, could it help them create writing that flowed logically, where the ideas connected smoothly, what we call coherence and cohesion?
So it wasn't just about a general sense of better writing. They were really focusing on those fundamental building blocks. That makes sense, especially given the complexities of, learning a third language.
Precisely. And to really understand the power of this flipped writing approach, it's important to look at the challenges these students often face with more traditional teaching methods.
Right. So what were the common stumbling blocks for these students before they started using flipped writing?
The research pointed to several key areas. Many students struggled with recognizing different types of writing, like understanding the difference between telling a story and arguing a point, They also found it difficult to come up with original ideas and then organize those ideas in a clear and effective way. Then, of course, there were the ongoing challenges of choosing the right words and, using correct grammar.
That sounds like a familiar set of frustrations, even for those of us writing in our first language.
It is. It's a universal challenge. And the researchers noted that traditional teaching methods sometimes don't provide enough of the structured, step-by-step guidance needed to overcome these specific hurdles. They drew on the work of education experts like Harmer and Scrivener, who emphasize that learning really takes off when it's active and interactive, not just passive listening.
They also mentioned something called the product writing approach. How does that fit into all of this?
Yes, the product writing approach that focuses on giving students clear models of what good writing looks like. It's about showing them the desired outcome and then practicing to reach that standard.
Okay.
So in a way, the flipped writing method builds on this by having students actively analyze those product models before they start writing themselves. So while product writing gives students the destination, a good essay, flipped writing adds a structured roadmap for getting there.
I see.
With checkpoints and guidance along the way through that pre-class analysis and the in-class practice.
Okay, we've got a picture of the challenges and the general idea behind flipped writing. Now let's really get into the nuts and bolts. How did they actually put this into practice with these students?
So the researchers designed a very structured 3-lesson cycle. The crucial first step happened before class students were assigned homework, where they studied a sample essay. But it wasn't just reading. They had specific tasks related to those 4 key areas we discussed: content, vocabulary, grammar, and coherence and cohesion.
So active homework, not just passive reading. What kinds of tasks were they doing with these sample essays?
Exactly. For content, they would analyze the main arguments, how they were supported, and how they connected to the central idea of the essay. For vocabulary, they'd identify important words and phrases, look up synonyms, and think about why those specific words were used in that context.
Mhm.
Grammar tasks involved identifying and practicing particular grammatical structures that appeared in the essay in this case, things like conditional sentences. And for coherence and cohesion, they would examine the linking words and phrases that had the essay together and how the ideas flowed logically from one paragraph to the next.
That sounds like it really forces them to dissect the writing and understand how it works from the inside out.
It does. And that detailed preparation then directly fed into the in-class activities. In the first lesson, students would write a single paragraph, specifically focusing on using the grammar structures and linking words they had analyzed in their homework.
Ah, okay.
So they were immediately putting some of that pre-analyzed knowledge into practice.
Immediate application that makes sense for solidifying learning. What happened in the second lesson?
The second lesson was focused on writing full essays, but with a lot of support. Students could refer back to their notes from the homework, their vocabulary lists, even use dictionaries. They were also given clear criteria and step-by-step instructions for what each paragraph should cover. Importantly, the teachers were actively involved, providing guidance and support, especially for students who were finding it difficult. After this lesson, the students received detailed feedback on their essays, looking at both individual mistakes and common patterns across the class in those key areas.
So it was a guided experience with plenty of opportunity for feedback, a really supportive way to build confidence. And then the third lesson was where they had to kind of fly solo, right?
Precisely. The third lesson was a summative essay on a similar topic. But this time, the students had to write it independently. This was the point where the researchers could really see how well the flipped writing approach had equipped them.
And it wasn't just about those final essays, was it? There was a continuous loop of feedback happening throughout this process.
Absolutely crucial. After each lesson, the researchers interviewed the students to get their direct perspective on what they found easy, what was challenging, what they found helpful, and even what they thought wasn't useful. Giving students that voice was a really valuable part of the research. And the teachers themselves also observed each other's lessons and then met to discuss student progress and think about how they could refine their teaching methods. It was a very dynamic and adaptive approach.
So with all of this carefully designed and implemented, what were the key results? Did they see a clear impact from using flipped writing?
The study showed some really promising results. They found significant improvement in students who had previously struggled with coming up with ideas, using a broader range of vocabulary, and making their writing flow more logically.
Wow, that's a really compelling result. It sounds like this flipped approach really hit the mark in those core areas.
It did. And interestingly, even students who were already performing at a good or advanced level also showed progress, particularly in making their grammar more accurate and using more specific vocabulary related to the essay topics. That suggests it was beneficial across the spectrum of learners.
So it wasn't just helping those who were struggling, it was pushing everyone forward.
Exactly. And perhaps one of the most telling findings was that the students themselves recognized the value of this approach. They specifically said that having clear guidelines, the support from their teachers, and those homework tasks that prepared them really helped them to improve their writing.
That's so important to hear, that the students felt the benefit. That buy-in can make all the difference, right?
It really does.
Now, the research also delved into the experiences of individual students through those case studies, students A, B, and C. Can you give us a closer look at what they learned from those individual stories?
Yes. These three students were chosen to represent different learning styles and levels of confidence. Student A was described as a confident learner, someone who generally learns quickly and has a good foundation in the language. However, they sometimes struggle to apply that knowledge in new situations and with the overall organization of their essays, particularly those connecting words that create a smooth flow. Interestingly, while student A initially enjoyed the vocabulary tasks and the homework, they later encountered some challenges with the cohesion, the logical linking of ideas, in their own writing.
That's a good reminder that even confident learners have specific areas they need to work on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What about student B? What did their experience tell us?
Student B was identified as a moderate learner. This student needed more support, and while they actively participated in class, they lacked confidence when faced with more challenging tasks.
Right.
They tended to make minor grammar errors and use basic linking words, or sometimes omit them entirely. For student B, the grammar tasks in the homework, while initially difficult, were ultimately seen as very useful. They also struggled with actually translating their ideas into well-structured sentences.
This really highlights the connection between understanding grammar and the ability to express oneself clearly in writing.
Yeah, that resonates. Knowing the rules but still struggling to, express complex thoughts fluently.
Exactly. And finally, student C, the unconfident learner. What were their key takeaways?
Student C processed information more slowly and often made repeated mistakes in vocabulary, spelling, and especially grammar. They required significant guidance from the teacher. However, they reported that the homework tasks actually helped them to better understand the overall structure and content of the essay they were studying. During the lessons, observations showed student A sometimes struggling to connect sentences logically, student B needing prompts from the teacher to elaborate, and student C was initially hesitant but became more engaged as the lessons progressed.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Seeing how the same flipped writing method could have such different impacts and benefits for learners with different profiles. And those interviews after each lesson must have provided such rich insights.
They did. For example, student A specifically mentioned that the vocabulary tasks helped them see how words were used correctly in context, which is a much deeper level of understanding than just, memorizing definitions.
Right.
Student B expressed a desire for even more focused practice on grammar, pinpointing that as a key area they wanted to improve. And student C found the analysis of the essay content and the exercises on conditional sentences particularly interesting, suggesting that even learners who lack confidence can engage with and benefit from structured preparation.
So when the researchers looked at the bigger picture, comparing how these students might have progressed with traditional teaching versus the outcomes they saw with flipped writing, what did that comparison reveal?
The researchers made a really insightful comparison. Based on their experience, they had a pretty good idea of the typical progress they'd expect using their usual methods. After implementing flipped writing, the data clearly showed a shift. A greater number of students achieved and even exceeded the learning goals they had set, and significantly fewer students continued to struggle and require substantial extra support.
Wow.
This strongly suggests that flipped writing had a positive and widespread impact on their learning outcomes.
So for you, listening and thinking about how you absorb information, this study highlights the power of preparing by examining examples before actively trying something new. It's a more efficient way to learn than just, jumping in blind.
That's a pretty powerful endorsement of the method. And it wasn't just about improved student performance, was it? The teachers involved also developed some valuable resources along the way.
Yes, this was a really important side benefit. The teachers collaborated to create instructional videos and additional learning materials, including more examples of well-written essays and extra practice exercises. These were all specifically designed for students to use at home as part of that flipped learning model.
Those videos would be great for students to revisit concepts at their own pace.
Exactly. And this also underscores a significant shift in the learning environment, a move away from a purely teacher-centered classroom to one that is more focused on the student. The emphasis shifted towards active learning, personalized feedback, and empowering students to take greater responsibility for their own learning.
Of course, with any new approach, there are bound to be some challenges. What were some of the hurdles they encountered when implementing flipped writing?
They noted a couple of key challenges. One was ensuring that all students actually engaged with the homework before coming to class. Some students showed less self-discipline in this area, so the teachers had to invest time in explaining why that preparatory work was so important.
Right, the why.
Yeah. They also mentioned the practical challenge of scheduling time for teachers to observe each other's lessons and have in-depth discussions about student progress, especially since teachers from 2 different schools were involved. They found some creative solutions, though, like using video recordings of lessons and holding online meetings to overcome these logistical hurdles.
That shows a real commitment to making the method work and to continuous improvement. It sounds like they were very thoughtful and reflective throughout the entire process.
They were. They really emphasized the importance of actively seeking and using feedback from the students themselves to shape their teaching strategies. They also highlighted the collaborative nature of the research, bringing together the expertise of teachers from different schools and the support of the Center for Pedagogical Excellence.
Hmm.
And it's worth noting that they also carefully considered the ethical aspects, like getting parental consent to ensure everyone was comfortable with their participation.
It sounds like a really comprehensive and well-executed study, and the fact that the findings have been shared at international conferences and published in a journal really speaks to its broader significance for education.
It does. It suggests that the insights gained from this research in Kazakhstan could be valuable for educators in many different contexts around the world.
So, to wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating research, what would you say is the most important takeaway for our listeners?
I think the key takeaway is that this research provides strong evidence that flip writing can be a highly effective method for improving writing skills. It does this by providing a clear structure, engaging students in independent analysis of writing models, and then offering focused practice and feedback in the classroom.
Right.
And importantly, it also shows that this approach can benefit a wide range of learners, addressing specific challenges they might face.
And for you, our listener, who's always looking for ways to learn more effectively, this study offers a concrete example of how a thoughtful and well-researched pedagogical approach can lead to significant improvements in a complex skill like writing.
Absolutely. And it raises a really interesting question. Considering the success of this flipped approach in a multilingual setting focused on writing, well, what other subjects or skills might be ripe for a similar combination of individual preparation and focused in-class application? Where else could this kind of structured learning lead to more efficient and effective outcomes?
That's a fantastic question to consider. And perhaps on a more personal level, what aspects of your own learning could be enhanced by taking a more structured approach to understanding the fundamentals before diving into active practice? It certainly gives you something to think about.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend and stay tuned for the next one.